Hi folks, welcome to RJA Impact. Today we're going to be going back over the last week and events going on in the trial of Paul Flores and Ruben Flores. As a quick reminder, Paul Flores is on trial accused of the murder of Kristin Smart, who disappeared some 26 years ago, and Ruben Flores is in court accused of helping his son cover up the crime. Our first witness of the week was Angela Butler. We saw her very late last week. And as a quick reminder, she's been employed at SERI, which is the Serological Research Institute, since 2001 and is currently a forensic DNA analyst. After talking a little bit about her credentials, we learnt that she's a body fluid expert and is able to identify semen, blood, urine, saliva and faeces through testing. She's done thousands of these sorts of tests over the years. We learned a little bit about one test that she does called HemDirect, and that's a test that detects hemoglobin, and that's a protein found in blood that gives it its red pigment. Tellingly, it cannot differentiate between humans and higher primates, and this is part of the reason, if you think back, that the defence were asking the contractor, Ed, whether he'd found any animal or other remains whilst he was constructing the house. Clearly, anything that was there might give us an alternative explanation for what we're about to find out. So we're now at the end of a chain of events which started with the cadaver dog searches and then the archaeologists who did digs in various areas and then took samples, and these samples were presented to Angela. So let's get right to it. 13 of the tests performed on the samples from the Flores property yielded positive results for the presence of human blood. Apparently, a ferret can actually yield a positive test as well as the higher primates, she testified, although we again heard that there was no ferret found when the digs were going on, or even the construction for that matter. Interestingly, when Angela was looking at the samples under the microscope, she extracted various fibres from the samples, which we heard about a couple of weeks ago, and this is the source for those now we know. And apparently the HemDirect test for blood looks a bit like a COVID test or a pregnancy test. There's a thin membrane, and if you see a line, that's one thing, but if you see a second line, that's a positive result. So there you go, now we know how it's done. Apparently she was looking at two samples here, a upper soil sample and a deeper soil sample, and it was the deeper one that yielded the positive results. All of this was backed up by a second person duplicating the tests, who found the same results. Then, a very frustrating part of her testimony, she attempted to extract DNA from the samples, and unfortunately she couldn't extract any DNA, and we learned that this was because DNA degrades over time, but also things like bacteria and microbes in the soil affect the DNA. Bacteria and DNA do not get along, which is how she put it. So to give you some context, Angela was receiving these packages in April 2021, and she received a few packages over a number of weeks during that period. So we are talking some 20 to 25 years after Kristin's disappearance. And the fibres, well, some of those were the same colour that Smart was last seen wearing in 1996, when she disappeared. Do you remember the search that we heard about a couple of weeks ago also, when a cargo van was examined and there was a patch on the floor that could have been blood? Well, when they cut this out, who received the 42 by 26 inch section of plywood? Angela did. Angela was able to test a piece of this about the size of a dime for DNA. And somewhat disappointingly for an outcome, Kristin Smart, Paul Flores and Ruben Flores were all excluded as contributors, but Susan Flores' boyfriend Mike McConville was included as a potential contributor. Angela also received the mattress from Paul Flores' dorm. Long story short, she tested a very small part of the mattress that had a very small brownish stain on it. And in Butler's words, it was a very low-level degraded sample. Kristin Smart and Paul Flores could neither be included or excluded as contributors. So in summary, I think what we have is definite positive traces of blood found in Ruben Flores' backyard, and nothing conclusive from the cargo van and nothing conclusive from the mattress. We had another one of those crazy questions from Sangat for the defence when he stepped up to do cross-examination, and they were looking at a log on some of the samples that Angela had produced. This is what he said. Some items say RMS. Those are actually my initials. What does that stand for? And Angela responds, that's how the lab designated that evidence locker. Sanger goes on, so you named an evidence locker after me? Thank you. And in the midst of stony silence, Sanger had to say, that's a joke. We get to another one as well, where Sanger's asking about the pH levels, that's how acidic or alkaline the samples are, and whether it's important in the test. Angela goes on to say that everything was done in accordance with the test manufacturer's instructions. Sanger then asks, and I'd love to have been there, and I think he was actually reading from one of the manufacturer's instructions, and what the manufacturer was Ceratec. So Sanger says, Ceratec says samples with a pH of less than 5 can produce false positive results, right? And Butler responded, less than 5 is basically battery acid. So much for Sanger professing to be a technical expert, I guess. He eventually makes a fair point for his client when he establishes that the HemDirect test has never been properly validated for use in soil, and Angela agrees. Quite a lot of delays then happened in court, and on September the 20th in the morning, Angela Butler was back on the stand. Sanger goes through with her a lot of technical details about how the tests work and the procedures involved and so on. We eventually get back to the fact that she did test this small brown stain on the mattress, but Kristin Smart and Paul Flores couldn't be included or excluded as a contributor. Sanger also established with Angela that none of the samples that she analysed, the soil samples that is, contained any pieces of bone or cloth, but she did say that she found some possible hair samples, and these were sent to another lab for analysis. Misik also had his turn as well. We didn't learn anything particularly new, and he inferred at the end of his examination that Butler could not draw conclusions from her findings. We had Shelby Liddle on the stand again, and this is the forensic specialist, and the only question that was asked really was whether Shelby could identify on a photo taken of Paul Flores' bedroom during a 2020 search a sheet that's white with a green foliage print. And that was it. Let's see where that goes, eh? Jason Nadal was then on the stand. He's the senior sheriff's deputy. He was shown a photo taken of Paul Flores' sunroom in 2020 when it was searched, and there was a desk in that room containing a Dell computer, and that was seized. DA investigator JT Camp was back for the umpteenth time and duly took the stand. So firstly, Pouvrel for the prosecution establishes that a green Ford Ranger, which he had a picture of, was registered to Susan Flores in 1996. It was registered in September that year. Also, there was a picture of a white Nissan pickup that was transferred from Ruben Flores to Paul Flores in the same year. That was on July the 18th. And remember, Kristin went missing in May of that year. Sanger on cross-examination establishes with Camp that the Nissan was reported stolen by Paul Flores. Clint Cole was up next. He's a detective that has worked on the case for many years, and we've seen him before. We then found out that the white Nissan is still actually in evidence with the police. Sanger asked him on cross-examination if the vehicle had been modified in any way since 1996, and he didn't know. Tiny bit of drama here. Pouvrel asked, were you present in court when Jennifer testified that it appeared to be a four-wheel drive in 1996? And Cole responds, yes. So that is evidence, correct? Sanger objects, I have a motion. He says, he opened the door, Your Honour, responds Pouvrel. Then Sanger goes on to accuse Pouvrel of misconduct and then called for a mistrial for asking leading questions, saying that Pouvrel should know better and that the truck Jennifer saw was a separate vehicle. The question was totally inappropriate, he went on to say, because the question implied Jennifer saw Flores' specific truck, and adding that Pouvrel, in quotes, knows that Jennifer has committed perjury. Strong stuff. And we're really getting through the witnesses. JT Camp was back on the stand. He was asked about a search warrant that was served on Ruben in May 2021, and it was to attempt to get DNA samples from Ruben. I would love to get the next piece of this because the officers were obviously recording on their body cams, and this was played in court. So Camp and Ruben are at the front door, and Ruben's reading the search warrant authorising the DNA swab. And whilst he was doing that, he stated that Susan Flores and Mike McConville, her boyfriend, had committed no felonies, only me. Oops. He then did correct himself and said, actually, it was only me that had been arrested. A change of tack altogether with our next witness, who was Christopher Fitzpatrick, and he is a computer forensics specialist. So what did he find on the seized computers? Let's find out. Pooverall doesn't take long to get into it, and he handed a photo to Fitzpatrick. Sanger immediately steps up and says that the jury needs to be admonished before the photo is shown. So Judge O'Keefe says, "Ladies and gentlemen, this evidence is being admitted only to confirm that Mr. Flores owned a red ball gag." Well, we know that was consistent with the story that the victim, I guess you'd call it, of Paul Flores, whose name I won't mention, testified that he was trying to force a ball gag into her mouth. Pooverall does publish another photo. It's explicit, and it is of a woman with the ball gag in her mouth, and it shows the black straps as it was described when we heard it a few weeks ago. And she was on a bed, and the white sheet she was on had a green foliage print, establishing it, I think, fairly clearly to be in Paul Flores' bedroom. Neither Misik or Sanger for the defence had any questions on the photos. I bet they didn't. I bet they wanted them out of there as soon as possible. And at that point, Mr. Pooverall for the prosecution says, "Your Honour, at this time, the people rest. The prosecution has wrapped up for now." So before we get to the defence, I'll split up the video and do another one where the defence starts. But Sanger, in the meantime, after that exchange with the photos, was trying to make the point that the showing of the photo and how explicit it is extremely prejudicial to his client, because it's only trying to establish that there was a ball gag and that tied up with one of the prosecution's witnesses' account of events. Sanger makes the point that there is no evidence of a rape or attempted rape here. The picture is apparently very shocking, and some of the jurors were squirming in their seats when it was shown. It'll definitely have a lasting impact on them. Just because something is relevant doesn't mean it should be admissible, Sanger said. And I don't really get that at all, but there you go, that's what he said. Seems like Sanger's client, Paul, is getting away with this somewhat lightly, because Pooverall says that the people's original request was to admit the entire video, and the court denied that and asked for a still photo instead. He also wanted to put in a still from several clips that showed Paul Flores' face, and that had also been denied. The probative value of the evidence could not be higher, as it corroborates testimony of two key witnesses, Pooverall said. The judge appears to be siding on the basis that the photos are valid to be put into court. The judge said, "Mr. Pooverall provided me with 6 still photos and also numerous clips which depicted that individual and Mr. Flores. The court endeavoured to select the least inflammatory still from that video, which depicted the ball gag and a pillowcase located in Mr. Flores' bedroom." All the jury were gone during that last discussion, and whilst they were still gone, both Misik and Sanger moved to dismiss the case against the Flores men because the prosecution had failed to make a case. Sanger argued there is no evidence of a murder case, no evidence of a rape, and no evidence in this case. The defence makes a motion for judgment of acquittal. Misik adds to this, "There is not just insufficient evidence, but a complete lack of evidence. The blood can't be sourced to anyone. No significance could be assigned to the fibres. Mr. Flores clearly just misspoke on the doorstep. He hasn't committed any crime." I'm sorry, but a hole in the ground under his deck is not evidence. We don't even know if Kristin Smart is dead. For all we know, she's in Dubai or the Middle East. And to be fair to Misik at this point, he did say that, "I know it's hurtful to hear and sorry to have to say it." He's acting in the best interest of his client, I guess. Proveril then recaps all the evidence so far and points to Paul Flores being very interested in Kristin, all of which I think was proven with corroborating witnesses. Paul, for example, said he had no idea who she was. That's a barefaced lie, said Proveril. He doesn't hold back. His intent was and is to target women at the conclusion of a social function to take advantage of them. This included the 1996 law enforcement interview videos where Paul Flores is basically a pathological liar lying through his teeth. Before I just quickly wrap up, if you like this video, then please think of subscribing to the channel. I do appreciate it. Hit the notification bell, then you'll get notifications on videos, on this case and other cases, as they are published. So, if I told you that we will be hearing from defence witnesses in my next video, then you'll realise that the judge ruled to move forward with the trial. Motion dismissed. Until next time, bye for now.